Okay, it's the top of the hour, so we are going to go ahead and get started with today's webinar. Thank you everybody for joining Why Metadata is Superior to Folders. We appreciate everyone taking a moment out of their day to join us, and the first thing I'd like to do is just take a second to introduce our speakers. My name is Shana Horka, and I work in product marketing here at Gimmal, and I'm joined by our key speaker today, Director of Sales Engineering, Dean Misenhimer. Now, before we get started, I have just a few housekeeping items to go through. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to submit them in the Q&A section on your screen. Rather than doing the raising hand option, we do Q&A since the audience is quite large. So unfortunately, we cannot unmute, but please make sure to put that in either the chat or the Q&A section. There will be at least one poll question that you'll see pop up, so please keep an eye out for that. All answers are anonymous. And as always, if you have any technical difficulties, please let us know so we can assist you. Now, to kick things off, I have just a few slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimmal and how we can help you take control of your information with our suite of solutions. Gimmal is an information governance software company that was founded in 2002. Our mission is to help you achieve your information governance goals by providing solutions that help you balance the value your information provides with the risk it also presents. Whether you're trying to discover information in unstructured data sources, migrate from legacy systems, or comply with policies across multiple repositories, Gimmal can help you achieve your information governance goals. We have a client success team and a global network of partners that deliver solutions in conjunction with key partners like Microsoft and SAP. Gimmal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive solutions include migration, file analysis, electronic and physical records management, document management for SAP software. And for those who are not new to our webinars, you might notice just a slight name change. They are the same products, just with a more simplified name for your convenience. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Dean so he can get started with today's presentation.
Thank you, Shana. Yeah, so today's topic is metadata and folders. You know, why use metadata? Why not folders? Well, let's start and just talk about why do we use folders? Well, they've kind of just always been there, right? That's what most of us have grown up with in a computing world. You know, regardless of when you started working with computing systems, hierarchical file systems that stored information on a hard disk have been there since we all started. Whether you started out with workstations or mini computers, the early PCs, and running, Unix, VMS, DOS, whether you started with graphical systems like Windows or Mac OS, or even, newer flavors of things like Linux, right, that were GUI based, that hierarchy of how information is stored has always been there. And tools like Windows Explorer and the Finder in Mac OS, that gave us that visual aspect of the hierarchy. And it took directories and subdirectories and turned them into folders with subfolders with subfolders. And it's kind of appealing, right? It's very visually, it's just very organized and very logical. And the OS tools facilitated using it, made it really easy to create new folders and drag things around and drag folders under folders. It was logical. And then, in the late 80s, early 90s, document management systems came around, imaging systems came around, and then later on, enterprise content management systems, kind of hit the market. And whether you were using FileNet or Documentum or LiveLink or Content Server or any other system that was out there, they all used a combination of folders. Sometimes it was cabinets and folders. Sometimes it was some other structure with folders and folders, but they all used kind of that same hierarchy. And so again, it kind of reinforced that that model that we're used to. And we're visual creatures, right? Again, folders just kind of look nice. I can picture that in my head. It's not abstract. So that's what we've always used. But folders have some limitations, right? There are reasons you may not want to use folders to organize your information. You may want to use metadata instead. Folders create artificial limits on your information. When I put things into a fairly hierarchical structure, it's rigid. I lose flexibility in how I can easily move that information around. Right? If I have everything organized in folders by department, by region, by document type, in folders within folders within folders, and suddenly the company reorganizes, well, now I got to completely redo my structure, and that's not easy to do. I have limits on how I can sort and filter my information. I can typically only sort and filter by what's displayed there in the screen. And if I'm in Windows Explorer, for example. Now, if you're a Windows Power user, you can go in and right-click and add some additional columns, and there's a lot of options, but most of the time there's no metadata there to leverage, and that's kind of out of the reach of the most common Windows user. It's not the way they work. And without metadata, I can't do targeted searches. I can do a full text search, but without a lot of metadata, that's really all I can do is a simple full text search or a search on the name or title of the document, and that's about it. It's hard to get precise. And then if I'm using shortcuts and links, a lot of systems support those. But if I have a link to a document and that link is based on location, well, if I move the folder, now that link is broken, right? And is no longer valid. So folders inherently have some limitations around them, and there's a reason why you may want to use metadata instead. And so here's a quick poll question, and we'll share the results. On average, how many clicks does it take you to get to a document, to get to content when you're looking for something and you want to open it? Right? How many folders do you have to drill down into to find what you need? So give us a quick answer here, and we'll kind of summarize the results and just display those out for everybody to take a look at. I'll be kind of curious to see what the results are. So not surprisingly, a lot of nested folders. Most of you are in the 3 to 5 clicks. Some of you even worse, 5 to 7 clicks. Things are really nested down, right? So good answers there, good insight. So let's talk a little bit about metadata. If I can get the slide to advance here, what's metadata all about? Why is it such a big deal? Well, metadata is data about your data. It describes the information that you have, right? I thought one really good description was metadata can be described as structured information that describes, explains, locates, or makes it easier to retrieve, use, or manage an information resource. And make no mistake, your documents and your content are information resources. They have value associated with them. And the more well-described they are and the more useful they are, the more value they contain. And one of the nice things about tools like SharePoint Online, is they make really good use of metadata. They're data-driven systems versus a hierarchical system, right? They can make good use of metadata and other information to organize information, to filter things, to group information together, and really let you go out and be able to search for that information. Right, so the screenshot on the right, simple example, I have a site collection for my legal department. I have a library that then organizes that information with all of my contracts. And then in that library, I've just got any contract that I might have, but my contracts have some metadata on them. They have, 1, we know it's a contract. 2, it has a name. 3, it has a contract type metadata column. What type of contract is it? Is it an agreement? Is it a vendor contract? Is it a real estate contract? And it has some other metadata that's not in the screenshot, like what is the contract end date, right? And then we have the basic, the standard information like the created date or the last modified date, right? So that's all metadata that I have available to me. So now if I want to go out and I want to do a search, I can start to get more targeted, not just say, go find me contracts or go find me any document with contract in the title, but go find me all of the vendor contracts that were created after January 1st, 2019, where the contract end date is before the end of 2022. I can build a search that looks like that. and I'm going to get a very targeted set of results instead of 1,000, right? I can also start to do things like sorting and filtering and grouping. So I can quickly sort by any of the metadata columns I may have displayed, right? Maybe I want to sort by contract type or sort by contract end date, or I want to group things together so I can quickly, if I have 500 documents sitting in a library, I can group those by the contract type and collapse the sections I'm not interested in looking at right now. And I can make the information more usable, and I can make it easier to work with, right? I can find what I'm looking for, and I can combine those things together, group it by this value, and then sort it by alphabetically by name or by date, for example, right? So that information becomes more usable to me. And here's a very simple example. And there's a couple of comments there in the chat window. Yeah, folder titles absolutely could be considered metadata, right? It's a piece of data that you could sort things by, but again, you're kind of limited to the folder that you're in to sort things. And yeah, different EDMS systems, are going to have different capabilities around how you can filter, how you can organize, and quite frankly, how you can search. So here's an example on descriptive metadata, right? You go to the market after work. You decide, well, I'm working from home a lot, soup would be nice for lunch. So you walk down the soup aisle and you're looking at all the cans of soup, and you kind of have these two options in front of you. Well, they're both soup, but which one is more well described? Which one gives you the information about what it is, what type of soup it might be, what's in the can, right? And it's a bit of a silly comparison, but it gives you the idea. The same is true for your documents. The same is true for your information. If I open up a folder and there's 100 documents in that folder, and the only data I have available is the creative naming system that my previous coworker had used on those documents, I don't have a lot of information. I got to go through and open up each one to really see what they are. Whereas if I have some metadata, I can make a much more educated guess. I can look and see, I can filter my view down as to what it is I'm really looking for. That's how metadata can help from a descriptive aspect, right? It's how you can help to apply the information. It's how you can more effectively, quite frankly, use the information. And one of the questions that came in the Q&A panel is, how do you get users to add it? That perfect transition to this slide, right? Because users, most of the time when you say, oh, well, we're going to start using, SharePoint or whatever system you're choosing to use, we need you to start adding metadata to your documents. They don't view that as a benefit. They view that as extra work they now have to do just to store a document. That's their initial reaction. And if you make that process overwhelming, right? If every time I go to upload a document, I have to fill in 12 pieces of metadata, I'm going to figure out how not to do that. I'm going to find other places to store my content. So you want to you want to get user buy-in. You're totally spot on with that comment. You want to streamline the process of adding the metadata. So you take advantage of some of the native features that may be there, like depending on the site I'm in, depending on the library I'm in, I can set default values that may automatically be applied. If I'm putting something in the legal site, I could probably set the organization value to legal, right? I already know that. I can, auto-populate things wherever possible. At the end of the day, your users just want to get their job done, right? They want to be able to upload content, find it. And so one of the ways to get their buy-in is show them some value in the process. Show them why they should take the extra time to do things like add metadata, right? Because if they see value, now they'll know why they should do it. Generate some quick wins, right? Create custom views, right? So create 2 or 3 views on libraries that are really useful to users so they can quickly say, oh, let me view this by vendor name. Oh, let me view this by contract end date. Let me view this by the employee ID. right? And they can do that with a click of a mouse, or show them how to create their own views, or show them how to do filtering or grouping using the out-of-the-box capabilities. Show them how to more effectively use search, or create some dashboards, right? Show them how to use a dashboard, or create some dashboards for them that use that metadata. If the users see value, they're going to embrace the concept, right? You can use the native capabilities of the system to help drive that. You can use third-party tools. Gimmal provides what we call cloud drop zones to streamline the process of adding information into SharePoint Online and automatically kind of drive that process of adding metadata. So, drop zones are hosted in the Gimmal cloud. It's simply a point-and-click configuration to create different tiles like what you see in the right-hand part of the screen. So I can do point-and-click configuration. I can set up a zone that says, oh, I want to upload contracts. Well, one, I can put security around it as to who can see these different zones, so that if I log in and Shana logs in, we see a different set of zones available to us. And then if I drop 4 or 5 contracts on the contract zone, now I'm taken through a wizard-based approach to upload the content. It's going to prompt me for, here are 3 metadata properties we're going to apply to all 5 documents. Fill those in. And you only have to do it once. And now here are some metadata properties, 1 or 2 fields that may be unique per document. Fill those in. Documents get uploaded, put in the right library, content type gets set, metadata gets set, boom, we're done. Right? So, there are ways to streamline the process using tools like Gimmal Cloud Drop Zones, using some of the native capabilities of the systems that you may have. Right? But at the end of the day, what this all leads to is, if you've got information organized, if you have information well described, it leads to having a good information architecture, right? And the information architecture, if you go back to thinking about that description we had earlier of metadata, it's about helping you organize the information so you can store it, find it, use it, and really what the latter half of our webinar is about, control it, right? Be able to put compliance policies and record policies around that information, right? That's what your information architecture does, and to do that, you've got to have information that, that is organized properly and well described. And the idea behind having a good information architecture is, if I've got the right building blocks in place, if I've got consistency around some level of consistency, right? You'll never achieve perfect consistency. We all know that. But if you've got some consistency around how your information is being uploaded, and you've got that framework in place, now you can start to put consistency around how your records management policies get applied and get placed on that content. So, if the ultimate goal is to put in place an information management system to enable your users and also enable effective records management on the back end, that all kind of ties together. Your information architecture will lead to having an effective records management policy on the back end. So let's take a look at some examples of how kind of those things tie together. Using metadata to drive records management policies. Well, it's one thing to have a whole bunch of records and just simply put retention on those records individually. But there are advantages to doing things like taking my records and organizing them into record case files. Well, if I have the right properties, if I have the right information, right, even if I'm still using folders in some cases and things like SharePoint, that can actually become an additional property I can use. You might want to limit how many you use, but I can combine location-based information like sites and libraries and folders. I can use metadata properties, and within tools like Gimmal Records, which is where the screenshot here is from, I can now begin to set up organizational structures for my records where I can have a record category for all of my legal records. And within that record category, I can have all of my individual record classifications for my different types of legal records. But now for things like my legal matters, my dispute resolution and litigation, I want to take all of the records related to a specific case and organize those together using some of the metadata properties I happen to have on my case files stored in my document management system. So within Gimmal, I can say, well, this is going to be a case-based record class, and I'm going to actually use whatever value I pull from SharePoint or Documentum or FileNet, whatever value happens to be in that matter or case name field. I'm going to grab that and I'm automatically going to generate case files and organize all of the records for that case into a single record case. So now I can trigger legal holds, I can trigger disposition approval on the entire collection of records as a single entity. It makes it easier to work with them. Secondly, I can begin to use that information as well to drive record classification and legal holds, right? So again, kind of have a file plan set up or retention schedule set up. This time we're looking at human resources. I've got different record classes for my different types of human resources records. Well, to automatically assign records to the appropriate record classification as they're added to Documentum, as they're added to my network file share, as they're added to SharePoint, right? I want to start using the properties that I have available, right? That descriptive information. So I have a content type that in and of itself is a property or a piece of metadata. First thing I'm going to do is say, is this an employee file? Well, if it is, that's the first condition. Go look at my metadata property called employee file type and make sure that this employee file isn't considered a medical employee file or a certification employee file. And as long as it's not one of those two types, any other employee file, I want you to assign it to my personnel files non-medical. I might have other rules that say if it's an employee file and it's medical, we'll now assign it to HUM06 there in the screenshot, my personnel files medical, right? So I can begin to drive very granular records classification using these properties and using the metadata that I have available to me. And I can do the same thing for legal holds, right? Again, I can start to use information that I can capture off of my documents. Any of the metadata properties. This is a simple example, kind of goes back to what somebody said earlier, where title, in and of itself is a piece of metadata, right? I can use that to drive classification of my records. And I can do the same thing to drive retention of my records. And that really can be where it is a big benefit. So now, as I'm classifying my records, I'm putting them under a records retention policy. I may be having them in case files. I can start to do things like, well, when you're uploading contracts into SharePoint, right, fill in the contract end date, and I can now use that as a retention trigger to begin the retention around my records. So I can take the contract end date, or I can take a value such as, if it's one of my legal matters, has it been marked as case closed? That may trigger retention. It doesn't have to be date-based. Right, so I can start to use my metadata properties to decide when and how to trigger the retention around my records. And I can combine those things together into a retention policy that says, okay, well, if it happens to be a legal case, don't do anything until somebody marks the case as closed. And when that metadata value gets updated, first thing we're going to do is declare all the records in that case file and lock them down so they're no longer editable. And then we're going to look at the other metadata property called matter date. And from that date, we're going to wait for 6 years. At the end of 6 years, we're going to do a dispose and delete of all those records. So what begins to happen is, going all the way back to the beginning, as your users upload information, it gets stored into the appropriate repository. I can sort, I can look for, I can search for that information and use it in my day-to-day activities. And in the background, your compliance policies, your records management policies can automatically be applied and automatically be triggered using the metadata that's been applied by your end users up front. And so that kind of takes us through our content. We got a second poll question here. If you'd like to see a demonstration of Gimmal solutions, I talked a little bit about Gimmal zones. I talked a little bit about Gimmal records. At the beginning, Shana mentioned some information about our other products. If you'd like to see a personalized demonstration, feel free to click, click there in the box. And while we go through the poll questions, there were a number of questions that came in the Q&A and in the chat panel. So Shana, I will let you kind of start going through those.
Yes, thanks, Dean. So the first one we have is, I agree metadata is the way to go, but how do you get users to add it if it is more than 3 to 5 sections? Also, do you recommend using folders in SharePoint?
So folders still have their place. Quite frankly, I still create folders occasionally, and again, depending on the system you're using, SharePoint will let you create a view that strips out the folders. So it treats a folder name as almost just another property and a way of grouping things. But I would say don't just default to folders automatically. Don't take what you have in Windows Explorer and recreate it in SharePoint because that's what you're comfortable with, right? Create, use them judiciously, use them when it makes sense, but use metadata as much as possible, but do it in a way that doesn't overwhelm your users, right? And to get your users to buy in, again, kind of show them some wins, show them why there's value to them to do that, and use default values where you can. Oftentimes, you may not want a hard default, but when a user uploads a document and they get hit with that properties panel, you fill in default values and they can either accept those, for the location they're putting in that makes sense, or they can override them if they need to. Anything you can do to make it easier on them is good.
Okay, and the next one is it possible to have sub-libraries in SharePoint? For example, tax federal, tax state, tax foreign.
You can't have like a sub-library within a library. That might be an example of where you might use folders. You could also have, you could kind of take it up a level, and you could have a site collection or a site, for example, that was tax documents. And then within that site, you have a library for the different types of tax documents or different regions that it may apply to. So you can do things like that. Or it's a classic example of where you might use metadata, actually. You've got a library for all your tax documents, but one of the metadata fields is type of tax document, right? And now that becomes a field you can use to filter, to sort, and to group by. So you don't have to get into that hierarchical structure.
And the next one is, how do you get concurrence across the enterprise on what each type of metadata actually means?
Good question. That's doing some due diligence up front, trying to come to some agreements. That's important. There will be times, quite frankly, when some departments may just dig their heel in and say, no, we have to call it this, and you may wind up with a little overlap there. But in general, it comes into think through that information architecture before you begin to deploy as much as possible, to try and get a level of concurrence. And then again, depending on the system you're using, a lot of systems support metadata inheritance and things like that. So you can set up a base document type. So we'll call it engineering document. But then I can have children of that. So that there are 4 or 5 metadata fields that every engineering document will always have. But then I can have children of that. So I have electrical engineering documents, and they have some unique fields for the electrical group. And I can have piping engineering documents, and they have some unique metadata fields for those. And I can have structural engineering documents, and it has some unique metadata fields for the structural guys. So everybody always has that common set of metadata, but I can start to create child types off of that as well that that can appease specific groups. So you start thinking through the capabilities of what your platform provides, and those are areas we've worked with customers on developing that information architecture. Great great question.
So I'm going to combine a couple of questions. They both have to do with disposition. So the first one is, disposition is not always to destroy records. Sometimes you need to transfer. How does your solution handle extraction and transfer? And then the second one is, how does the data that gets destroyed get reported to, say, the Virginia library? So about transfer and reporting.
Okay. So transfer or dispose is just the action at the end of the life cycle. So within Gimmal records, when I create my life cycle, I can set what action I want that life cycle to take. And so it might be dispose and delete. It might be transfer, create a transfer copy, then dispose of the record. How that life cycle is triggered up front may not change, right? It could be triggered off of any of those examples that I showed as I went through the slides. It's just the action you choose. Gimmal can say, okay, well, we're going to put a copy into this location because we need to have a transfer copy and generate a report of the metadata. Now we'll go delete the record. Or we're just going to create a transfer copy and not delete the record. It just depends on what you need to do. That's just an action in the lifecycle configuration you choose.
Great. And then are there workflow capabilities in Gimmal?
Around disposition processing, yes. So we can set up a flow for the approval of disposition, but the more general kind of business process management workflows would be handled in the respective content management system, like SharePoint. You'd use Power Automate, or if you're using a different system, you would use the workflows available to them, or you might use a third party like a Nintex, something like that.
And can you use metadata as an alternative to setting access permission to documents?
It doesn't really give you, it wouldn't do it the same way permissions would. One way you could creatively do that would be creating a search-based experience where instead of my users going to the site that I want where all the content may be stored across different sites, I just go to a specific site where I can enter a search term and it returns information from across, let's say, all of SharePoint that matches my search term. But that still wouldn't prevent somebody from, it would never give you security that would say, if I knew what to look for, I could always still find it. That you would still want to use security to really lock things down in that respect.
And then are Gimmal modules SaaS-based?
Yes. So, yeah. Well,
And
there's usually an option on-premise or SaaS, but they're all available as SaaS.
And then I think this is the last one, unless another sneaks in. These are great questions. So the last one is, basically metadata represents and creates a hyperlink. Any ideas how these can be presented in the front end by semantic technologies for intuitive navigation? Data landscape in a certain scope or process.
That one might take a little more discussion, but metadata can be, I just have to think that one through a little bit. Yeah, that one might require a little discussion. I mean, the metadata in a system like like a Documentum or an OpenText or in a SharePoint, it's descriptive information on the document. There are also things that the metadata that the system provides, like object IDs that are unique identifiers for any specific document. And those are typically the things that will point at a document from a hyperlink because it is a unique identifier to a specific instance of a document, whereas the metadata is more descriptive for searching and things like that. Yeah, that one might be more, we might want to have a discussion to kind of talk specific use cases there on that one.
Okay, well, I think that wraps up our Q&A. If anyone can think of any more questions, you can see both of our email addresses up there on the screen. Feel free to email either one of us. It'll get redirected to the right person, who will be Dean. Or if you want to, Dean, go to the next slide. You can always email info@gimmal.com. It's a little easier to remember, or visit our website, www.gimmal.com. We will be sending a recording of this webinar out for those who are interested in viewing the recording or sharing with others in your organization in the form of a thank you email between 24 to 48 hours. So please keep an eye on your email if you would like to view the recording. But other than that, we hope to see you guys for our next webinar next week, tracking physical records with barcoding and RFID. Thank you for joining today's webinar and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone.